Hey everybody, it's Heji, and I'm here today with the lead developer, designer of Path of Exile. His name is Chris Wilson,
Hey there, nice to be here today.
and I'm also here with my buddy Ox, which you may know as one of the finest PvPers of raid class. You may also know him as the Diamond Eternal Conqueror supporter, always hanging out and starring on his Marauder, or you might know him as the retired first poster on Chris's news.
Hey, how's it going?
And there's myself. I'm formerly known as Hegemonica. I was ranked 4 on Anarchy, level 99 Witchwander, and I'm 92 Immortal Wukong Scion on Nemesis. And to start off, I wanted to congratulate Chris for his GameSpot 2013 Game of the Year award, and I also wanted to thank him for taking his time and being able to chat with us and do this podcast.
You're welcome. Yeah, we're really proud of the award. The team was really pleased to get it, and it's no problem to be on the podcast. It's 9 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday here, so I have some time free.
That's awesome. And lastly, I wanted to confirm that this is the first meeting of you, Ox, and myself in real-time chat. Can you guys both confirm that this is the first time?
Indeed.
Yeah, this is the first time we've spoken.
All right. So the first part of this podcast, I just like to talk about you, Chris, the developer. Can you tell us what's like the day in the life of Chris Wilson? And I mean, we've heard rumors that you work so hard and you didn't even take a vacation for 2 years. Is that true?
It's true that I had no time off for a couple of years. That was a pretty hectic open beta, but I took some time off over Christmas this year, which was really good. Went away with some friends. Typically, a day in the life would involve waking up pretty early in the morning. Jonathan and I try to get to the office before the other workers so that we can be there from the start. And so we, get there, I guess, just before 9 a.m. in the morning New Zealand time. And then it's nice and quiet for the first hour or so of the morning. People come in by about 10 usually, though it varies from person to person, so it's a good time to catch up on email and get urgent stuff out of the way. Then it gets very busy. There's a constant stream of people wanting to talk about stuff. Typically, things get elevated as they become important, so if there's some customer service crisis or perhaps something happening on the forums that needs a lot of attention, it'll get elevated. And I'll, work out a decision with the other relevant team members. And during the day, we try very hard to get as much done towards whatever next patch we're working on. By about 3 in the afternoon, the focus shifts to working out something for the daily news, which we try to put a lot of effort to come up with something interesting every day. We think it's really important to keep close to the community. Then by about 5:30, some of the team members who came in early are starting to leave, so it gets a little bit quieter again, and it's a good time to sort out last-minute issues, and we're typically out of the office by 6:30 to get food. And then the evening is just, very, very, relaxing work and answering emails and simple stuff like that.
Oh, so how much time do you spend in each department, like art, graphics, balance, legal? Like how much time do you allocate for each?
Well, thankfully I don't have to worry about the art at all. That's in the capable hands of Eric, so he handles everything over there. It literally has its own office now, so I generally don't think about the art stuff, and Eric handles it, which is excellent. And, I mean, typically I'll only see stuff from art when it's finished. Like yesterday I saw what the new skill Desecrate looks like. All I knew was there was a skill called Desecrate before that. I didn't actually know what the skill looked like, so that was pretty cool. I mean, the name may change, of course, but we had a guy come to the office to meet the team and stuff. It was his birthday, and his girlfriend or wife took him to meet up with us, and he was showed a bunch of new content that was going on 1.06, and it was the first time I saw most of it. So from an art point of view, I generally leave that completely to the artists, which generally works well. With regard to balance, that's something I directly supervise. Carl and Rory handle that. I generally don't make the minor decisions, but I listen to what they say while they work, so I can intervene with obnoxious interjections if I disagree with anything.
Do you? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go on.
Do you have lunch with Carl and Rory, or like do you guys min-max your time like for lunch, or you guys just like do your own thing, or like is it tight, or is the timing so tight that you're kind of like, hey, let's go have lunch together?
We typically don't take lunch breaks at the same time at the office. I mean, people just grab something small. Occasionally, the team will go out for lunch on like a Friday, and we have these lunch meetings on Monday, which have the whole team involved. and I give a stand-up address to the team to let them know what's happening, but I typically don't talk to Carl and Rory over their lunch breaks. This is mostly because that's time off for them to relax for, the brief 20 minutes until back to the horrible work schedule. But because I sit in a place where I can hear what Carl and Rory are saying, I can supervise any balanced discussion without having to actually go and do the balanced discussion a lot of the time. An example of that is the changes we're making to the summoning exploit with the Cast on Death skill gem, where they've worked out the solution to it, and I listened to it and didn't have any objections, so I haven't been involved in that process, but I know what the solution is.
Okay, yeah, we have some questions about that a little bit later as well. Everyone knows you're a tease and a master troll on the forums. We're always, Hedgie and I are always digging for hidden tidbits and any upcoming information that we can find, searching through every period of the post looking for hidden links. Is this a decision you made as a company to keep interest heightened, or is it just the way you are naturally?
I think it's because the founders are all trolls in that way, so no one's stopping us from doing it, if you see what I mean. It's easy to bake some kind of thing into each post or image that we release. I mean, obviously most posts don't have anything, but it's fun to put something small there. I mean, if in doubt, just throw a row of Fither in the inventory and that works good.
That always does the trick.
Nice. I actually intended to do that for the patch video from a week earlier, but completely forgot. In fact, my post for the patch video has me lamenting the fact I forgot to do something trollish in
there. This kind of ties in what you said earlier, but it also adds, do you oversee all the decisions made about the game? Do you have the power to veto any decision? And if you could include how much you delegate and how much you just trust a particular group, like you mentioned the art department, you just completely let them do their own thing. And has the development process changed since the early stages of design, specifically referring to everyone's role?
So initially the three New Zealand founders, me, Jonathan, and Eric, divided it up, so Eric's in charge of everything to do with art, which eventually became everything creative, he has final say on anything to do with music and sound, for example, all the lore stuff. Jonathan's the technical director, so he handles anything to do with computers. And while I am a programmer myself, Jonathan is a much better one, so if there's a decision about how the game should work internally, or a technical decision we make, a language we use, a tool we use, what servers we've got, how many, what they're running, that kind of stuff, Jonathan handles those decisions. And I handle theoretically everything else from the point of view of, business decisions and design stuff, but I certainly check everything I do against Jonathan and Eric, and to some extent it's more a matter of them vetoing what I want to do rather than the other way around, I suspect, because I'll push a case for a specific thing, and if they object, then we won't do it and we'll find another solution. So technically, I have the power to veto normal workers, but collectively as a group, me and Jonathan and Eric will veto each other's stuff whenever we feel that it's a bad thing. But this has worked really well. Most of the time, we're so in tune with what we're doing as a group that it is very rare for us to disagree on how something is implemented.
Yeah, I mean, Ox and I, we really love your employees like Carl and Rory. Everything that they put on the thread, it just makes us laugh hysterically. We were wondering, do you personally interview the employees, or do you have an HR department that handles that?
We don't have an HR department, and I've typically interviewed the employees. If it's a programming job, of course, it'll be Jonathan, and if it's an art job, it's Eric. The other guys I'd interview. And now we have the customer support department taking care of itself. That's run by Samantha and Jess, so they interview the new employees. I mean, it gets to the point where I go upstairs to talk to customer support, and there's people working there who I haven't yet met. So I assume this is a new employee or someone that snuck into the building. So it's really nice to have those departments take care of themselves.
How much time would you say you spend doing developmental work versus handling legal issues or business matters?
It's probably about 50-50, but it's a fair number of hours per day, so I try to keep the development stuff during the core workday when other people are there, and do all of the business stuff in evenings and weekends where I can just focus on it alone. And, I mean, anyone who's emailed me about something that I can't reply to quickly has seen how long it takes for me to get back to them. I mean, it can be weeks in some cases, so the business stuff isn't given high priority.
So, would you say you prefer doing the developmental stuff over the legal issues?
Absolutely. Running a business is incredibly boring. I mean, whenever it's tax season, and we have a New Zealand and an American company, so it's tax season all the time, it seems, so there's always something boring to do there. The development, on the other hand, is amazing. I mean, who wouldn't want to be making a game?
How much of your time, like say your free time, do you spend on Poe forums, Reddit, and Twitch streams? I remember a little bit ago, whenever that there was that bug where the guy found like 100 uniques in the map. I remember seeing you there, and it was pretty late your time, I think.
I'll typically be hanging out on the forums or Reddit, and I generally don't watch streams unless something specifically is going down. This is partly because I can have a web browser open to be reading the forums or Reddit, but watching a stream is actually like watching media, in terms of it taking a lot of concentration. I have to, try to spend time with my wife when I'm at home, so I can't be doing something incredibly invasive like watching people play, but it's easy to have a tab open.
Yeah.
I spend most of my spare time in engaging with Path of Exile in some way, and a lot of disasters typically occur outside of work time, so it's, it certainly happens that 1 in the morning or 3 in the morning there'll be a phone call and something to sort out.
That's really cool. As a developer of a polished game, is there a particular website that was created on behalf of Poe that you were impressed with? And if there are many, can you give us like your top 3?
I think that the trading tools that the community have made are really good, and while, you're familiar with our personal company stance on trading, I'm really glad that those tools exist, because it means that people that want to have searching for items can do so without us having to implement that and potentially suffer the problems that would occur if it was integrated into the game. So all of the trading tools are extremely good. I quite liked the dynamically updating currency exchange rate sites, because they solved the problem where users would just distribute an image that has a table of the currency prices, which prevents them from dynamically changing as stuff happens. And we try hard to make the rates change through interesting things. When we introduce new recipes, we understand it will cause currency to shift, and this is part of having an interesting economy. What other sites were there? It's neat to see fan sites where the people painstakingly translate every post that we make into their native language and have little communities of people. That's really, really cool to see. And I enjoy hearing from the people who run those. I'm happy to shout out these kind of sites in the news, of course, as people write in with them.
Okay, so we're going to kind of shift the podcast more towards GGG the Company. Is there a common ground that all your employees share, both new and old? Do you require all your employees to have an extensive gaming background, or can they just be like a professional designer, coder, artist, that doesn't partake in gaming as a hobby?
A lot of our workers aren't hardcore gamers, the people who work on specifically dedicated areas. I'm trying to give a good example here.
Did you say are or aren't?
Oh, aren't. There's obviously a mix. We typically have hardcore gamers in every department, and we try to shift those people to the ones who are more likely to make decisions about what hardcore gamers would want. An example is our sound department, which is one guy. There's a guy called Andrew, and Andrew's a gamer, so he exactly understands what we're going for with the sound on Path of Exile. He completely understands from a player's point of view what he wants to hear, and that's great. Whereas in our 2D art department, for example, who do things like concept art and images for the website, some of the people there, haven't played a lot of Diablo 2 in the past, for example, but that's fine. The work they do is still amazing. It doesn't really matter with regard to coming up with nice user interface or stuff at the website, or concept art for Act 4, whether they've played 200 or 1,000 hours of Diablo 2 in the past.
What can you tell us about your internal test team? How many people are included? Who are some of the key players? And any update on the alpha team?
So our internal quality assurance department is now up to 5 people. It's run by Mark. We internally call him Mark II, because he was the second Mark to join the company, so we just take numbers on the end of people's names. Initially we thought this would be offensive, but he actually quite likes the name, so...
That's Neon, right?
Yeah, that's Neon. So he runs our quality assurance department, and what we've typically found in the past is that people graduate from quality assurance because once you've been testing this kind of stuff so rigidly every single day for years, it becomes easy to overlook things that have worked 1,000 times before. And we have the ability to break stuff. Like, it's amazing internally how often we used to break the ability for item linking to work in chat. But yet, 99.9% of the time it does work, so testing item linking seems like a waste of time after every small change. But yet, sometimes you can miss it and you look really dumb if you do. So we try to keep the QA people graduating onto bigger and better stuff. For example, Thomas, who's our server administrator, actually started off filling in a gap in QA at the beginning, until we needed a dedicated server administrator. And Rory started off in QA. He was the QA department for quite a while just by himself. So once people get to the point where they understand the game really well, they migrate onto other roles. And for example, Mark, that's Neon, was basically entirely responsible for the balance of Descent champions. So he just did that as an interesting test to see how we do as a designer/balancer, and did very well. But because he leads the QA department so well, we're keeping him in charge of that for the time being. I think there are 4 other guys in the department, so it's the largest it's ever been so far. And this is basically because of the push for the 1.1 patch that's coming out in early March. We have a lot of QA requirements to get that tested. The other thing to note is that we're relying less on our alpha server than we were in the past. Typically during, for example, closed beta, we'd push an update to alpha and check to see what people thought. They'd find exploits, crashes, that kind of thing, and we'd fix it before it went live. Over time, people became less effective at finding these problems on alpha as the game became more complex. It's partly because the alpha testers have no obligation to, work any particular amount, and some of them may say, well, look, I've just tested 10 patches, I'm not going to test the 11th one. And we had enough people not testing the 11th one that the amount of stuff we were getting from alpha was unfortunately not enough, to actually release the product on. We had to QA it ourselves internally. So we kind of redundantly got a QA department that was able to do what the entire alpha testing server would do. And since then, we haven't really needed to push the patches on there. We still do, mostly so that they can be tested in terms of the deployment process. And there are some people who have access to alpha who, I guess, got through the cracks when we kind of half shut it down. And those people do check to make sure that the patch installs for them and that kind of stuff. But it's our goal to bring back the alpha program with the 1.1 patch, because we're going to need a lot of community feedback on that. So we're trying to review how we can get alpha testers in a way that doesn't involve people leaking information, because in the past that was a big problem.
Right.
Okay.
I just realized I set my Mumble name to the password for the Mumble. That's pro.
Yeah, we were laughing when you zoned in.
I think I've done that before. Anyway, carry on, please.
I was gonna say, GGG seems to understand that devastating bug fixes can completely ruin the game, economy experience. We've seen that with other, big labels. Who are your damage control people, and are they required to work from home when a patch gets released, or are patch days usually late office hours for them? Can you give us the worst case scenario that the team had to stay late to get the job done?
That's a great question. To some extent, I love damage control and planning around it, because it's the time where you see the team work so closely together, in a really cool way, where you get something done that everyone really needed fast. So an example of damage control is the evening that we had the Carrion Queen problem, where we deployed a patch that had 2 issues. The first one was that the Carrion Queen damage was bugged and killed a lot of hardcore characters unfairly. And the second one was actually that the Dominus fight would crash if he ever charged twice in a row. Now, both of these are big problems. The Carrion Queen thing was just slaughtering characters, and the Dominus thing was actually just preventing progression past that area. And either of these 2 problems would result in a hotfix normally, so it was coincidental that they both occurred at the same time. And that evening, we were away having dinner when I got SMSs about both issues, and as soon as I heard about the Carrion Queen thing, I was concerned, and as soon as I heard about the Dominus thing, it was very clear that everyone, who was involved in this needed to get to the office now. So Jonathan and I drove to Mark 1's house. He's the gameplay programmer who would fix the Dominus thing. We picked him up from his house, took him to the office. He's completely happy to help out here, of course.
You just hijack him.
It's hey, you've got some overtime.
Rally the team.
Yeah. So, in that kind of situation, we add 50% on to people's pay for those hours, because it's, strange circumstances and that kind of thing. So they're generally happy to help out in the evening fixing some bugs. And so we took Mark to the office, got him to work on the Dominus thing, while Jonathan and I worked on the Carrion Queen issue, and within a couple of hours, which is usually longer than it would take, we had a patch ready that we could deploy. It can be much quicker to hotfix things. We actually have some new technology that Jonathan just finished yesterday that allows us to hotfix the servers without restarting the realm. In the past, we could hotfix client problems without restarting the realm, which wouldn't occur very often at all, because client problems are relatively non-critical. But now we have the ability to fix balance problems or crashes on the servers, and have it so new people who start playing get the new fixed servers without having to take everyone off and put them back on again.
On a side note, how many man hours did it take to revert? I noticed you guys restored some of the Carrion Queen deaths, and you apologize about it, and you were kind of against it, but I just want to know how many man hours did it take to do that?
most of the evening until very late for like 3 or 4 senior people. It's not easy to revert stuff. I mean, there's no big button that we're refusing to push to make people come back to life again. It is like a manual database operation where you have to cut a long story short, go through backups of the database, find the last good backup of the character, and then do a ton of work to make sure that they haven't put items on the character or taken them off or done funky stuff like that that's going to duplicate them. And you have to make sure that any items they've traded away, properly accounted for, so you're not accidentally putting an extra copy back, and there's the gems, and it's just a nightmare.
I see.
We got that done because it affected 700 players, and every day I regret the decision to restore the characters, because while we had to, 700 people died unfairly and it was entirely our fault, it causes the impression that every death should be reverted because there was probably desync involved.
Right. Next question is, with your finance degree and background, do you have business analysts or advisors that you refer to when making them, or do you do it with the partners of GGG like Jonathan, or like how do you go about making those decisions?
We typically just talk between the founders, and there's more to GGG than just the 3 founders I mentioned. Like, for example, there's Brian, who's our American co-founder, and I didn't list him earlier because the question was about how the founders divide up tasks, whereas because he's in America, he handles a different set of responsibilities. And we'll talk to the other founders and large shareholders and make important business decisions ourselves. We typically don't trust the advice of external people who don't understand the games industry, because like 99% of free-to-play games have some dubious business practices with regard to user acquisition and ways that they monetize the users. And whenever we ask for advice on stuff, we get a ton of advice that the players wouldn't be happy with. So we try to make our own decisions about what players would actually like.
Do you hire people for the sole purpose of siphoning both good and bad feedback from the forums and other sources like Reddit, and then have them present it to the team, or do you guys go through all that stuff yourselves and sift through the threads?
Prior to closed beta, I read every forum post on the forum. Every evening I'd catch up on the few thousand new forum posts. On the day that closed beta started, it became impossible to do so because there was 100 times more than I could ever read. So since then, my typical forum browsing habits are to flick through the threads in general discussion, trying hard not to reply unless it's an important issue, because it's very easy for my posts to get lost out of context, and there's a lot of work to have to keep up replying to people. Like, I don't really want to fire and forget a single statement without actually having a discussion about it.
Right.
So I try to keep discussion from me out of the threads in general discussion. I do keep a very close eye on the patch notes forum, the races forum, and the announcements forum, essentially the 3 news ones. So the better place to ask really personal questions is in the appropriate discussion of it, for example, in the patch notes. If you're specifically wanting a reply from me, the team do spend quite a lot of time looking through the forum. Like, customer support have a job, in addition to handling reports of spam and bad activity in game and answering emails, they'll be going through the forum and answering people's questions where appropriate. So they definitely elevate threads to me. I mean, there's probably 10 threads a day that they paste to me. You need to read this. At least check out what's in it, even if you don't reply to it. So we do get a lot of, and that's just me as well. All the other members of the team have their own specific forums. Like, there's a specific visual effects forum and there's a specific audio forum, and the guys related to that do spend a lot of time answering feedback in those forums. Reddit is generally low enough in terms of number of posts per day that it's easy to keep an eye on it, and I greatly prefer the system on Reddit where you can upvote things so that things that want visibility get visibility. If we could do our forum software again, I'd be strongly pushing for something that involved that kind of community filtering, because this strict post order thing just encourages bumping and puts occasional nonsense threads above really important ones.
Yeah, Reddit's also a great place to get a good laugh or a smile when you're having a rough day.
Yeah, there's some good quality funny posts on our own forum as well, of course. You just got to find them.
Yeah. My next question is, I was kind of intrigued that when I read that Diamond Supporter newsletter, you guys hired a girl from South Korea, Eunyoung, and I was wondering how you guys went about finding her. Like, how did you guys go about getting her?
I wasn't involved in the process. From my point of view, Eric said to me, we're hiring a concept artist from South Korea.
And that was that?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a funny anecdote there where he went to pick her up at the airport but hadn't yet realized that Eunyoung was a female name. So, it's just kind of assumed that because almost every job application is male, that when the only information they give you is their name and some work they've done, you judge their work, say we need to hire this person, and then it's kind of irrelevant what sex they are. But Onion's been a very good hire. She's been amazing in the concept art department, so we're very pleased.
That's awesome. Okay, my next question is kind of a sensitive one that gets talked about a lot, but would you guys be opposed to running like sting operations for like to combat RMT like on these websites, just posing as potential buyers and catching people in the act and then banning them, and then I feel like if you did this process, you wouldn't have to do it so much to where you had to facilitate it all the time that it would get around that the word would get around. If you do this, it could potentially be a GGG employee and you can get banned, and that would just deter people from the people that are on the fence of using RMT. Like, what are your thoughts about that?
It's mainly like what I think, and a lot of people really hate D2JSP and how you can take work from one league, liquidate your stuff into forum gold, which you guys are against forum gold, of course, from your post. But and then spending all that in new leagues, which is the same as RMTing, and you can go on there, and I know plenty of people that I've had on friends list from trades and stuff that have the same exact name on D2JSP as they have account names in game, and you can message them, say, hey, are you the guy selling such and such on D2JSP? And they'll openly admit, yeah, that's me. Like, it's like they don't know, or they're just so confident that they're not going to get banned that it's just common practice.
I have to be very careful when talking about the anti-RMT stuff, because obviously, like, if I just explain in great detail what we do to catch people, then they're sitting there taking notes. But it's very common for us to order items from Chinese item sites so that we can track where they came from. And a lot of my personal attention on the RMT stuff is against the large Chinese item site syndicates. Several reasons. The first one is they would contribute were they not, curtailed. They would contribute quite a lot more than any individual players would. Secondly, they're doing it, or would be doing it, were they not curtailed, on a scale that completely dwarfs player activity in the game. I mean, if you're running, say, 300 Path of Exile bots very efficiently, you're finding items, like, considering it's 24 hours a day, you're finding items equivalent to thousands and thousands or tens of thousands of actual players who, play very occasionally. So it's the utmost priority for us is making sure that they're not doing that, which they aren't, because as soon as they do, they have very bad stuff happen to them. I can't go into the specifics there, but it's a constant fight to just keep the wave of bots that would exploit the game because it's free to play out. And we're doing that, but it means that our resources are stretched somewhat thin. We do have specific people who work on individual RMT cases, those who are reported on JSP. We've had a lot of problems in the past with specific high-profile people being impersonated on JSP. It's not hard to register an account that sounds like Kriparian and then post, pictures of his items that he's also trying to trade on Path of Exile. And sure, it's relatively easy to work out whether the guy's just joking around and lying, but we can't just say, oh, the username's the same, ban the Path of Exile user, because their reply is always going to be, that wasn't me, that's just some guy using my name, because it's worth a shot to say that. And because of this, we try to get more evidence, and that means looking at trade logs and chat logs, and it's quite a lot of work. And it's one of those things where you can have a productive day and stop 15 people, but it doesn't affect community perception, because we don't exactly go and advertise 15 guys were banned for RMT today. It's something we handle discreetly. Maybe it would be good to publicly shame people, I'm not sure. I mean, we'd have to look into various privacy rules, and the community may not like it if we do. I don't know. But it's something we do put a lot of time in. We have a growing department of people within customer support who handle the day-to-day of that, and I spend maybe 40 minutes a day myself looking at how the Chinese botters are evolving to make sure we stay one step ahead of them.
Right. Okay, so we're going to kind of shift the podcast towards game balance now. And my first question is, do you guys ever copy someone's account to play their characters and with their build to see how successful they are without us knowing about it? And if you guys do try out other people's accounts, how often do you do it? And do you make testing and balance changes around it?
Yeah, we have a server in the office which is populated with everyone's characters, and it's restored, I think, every night at 2 AM. So it's very easy for us to log into specific people's accounts. That we don't know their passwords, of course, because the passwords are just blanked out when we get the accounts. But this is very useful both for, investigating RMT stuff, as I just mentioned, but also in just seeing how people are building their characters. And we have to be careful, of course, not to balance the entire game around one guy's character. So it's typical that we'll, ask a question like how many, for example, let's say we care about using shield charge at high levels, so we'd start by going, well, how many people are using shield charge at high levels? Well, not very many. Well, how are they building it? And we log into the 4 characters. and have a look to see what their particular builds are like. Typically, it's not common, but it can happen where if someone's complaining about balance issues on the forum, like they're saying their build just isn't powerful enough, we can log into their copy of the character that we have locally and check to see how powerful their build actually is. And you see some really interesting stuff. Like back when I used to do this myself, this is a long, long time ago, there was a guy on the forum complaining that Path of Exile was too difficult, and he said it in a very angry and hateful way that, essentially he couldn't get past Mervale, and he, had a lot of nasty things to say about the game. So I figured I'd log into his character and see how hard it would be to take down Mervale, because if he actually has a tough time, then maybe we need to fix it. So I log in and all of his gear is white. He's got no blue items, no yellow items, and in the stash he has this perfectly curated, quite impressive selection of all the currency that's dropped so far, including like 3 Alks and a Chaos, and he's level 15 and can't get past Mervale. I mean, it took like, an Alk and a Transmute to take her down, basically, So
Right.
that was quite interesting, and that taught us, we have to do what we can to discourage low-level players from just hoarding the currency for later, because if they can't play the game, there won't be a later. The balance guys, of course, do this for balance testing a lot when they check people's characters, especially with regard to passive tree changes. Like 1.1 is coming up; it has a lot of balance changes, as you would expect, because we try to keep them for the the 4-month cycle, as it were. And because of that, we like to log into people's characters and remake them with a new passive tree, with the new variations to the skills, and see whether or not it plays correctly still.
Everyone knows what's been going on with the recent ladder race to 100 on Nemesis, if you can even consider it a race. How do you guys feel about such an easily abusable bug that allows players to gain way more experience than has been normally possible without having to really do anything except run past the monsters? And of course, I'm talking about the cast on death snapshotting. And what are your feelings about summoner snapshotting and righteous fire in general?
The issue with Summoner Snapshotting and Righteous Fire, I believe, is best brought to Carl rather than me. As far as I understand, there isn't an immediate plan to affect that particular thing. The fix we have to cast on death, of course, does fix the specific case here, but it doesn't. I think it doesn't affect general snapshotting of minions. I could be wrong, though. I mean, there could be a subtlety to it that hasn't been brought to my attention. This particular issue with cast on death was one that we knew about from early in the season with regard to the Uber Zombies thing, where you can just, make very powerful damaging zombies. And at the time, people hadn't considered the concept of it essentially letting you do it with specters, especially important specters. Having some of the ladder results corrupted by this is very unfortunate. Having said that, it is an intentional way that people can play the game, given how the game works. I mean, Cast on Death says the attached gem is going to do 400% damage or whatever, and that's what it is doing, and snapshotting is just a rule of the game, so we're certainly not banning anyone overdoing this. It is a shame that a cheesy way to play was left unfixed for so long. There are numerous internal reasons for why we didn't get a patch out immediately for it, but the patch is coming, I believe, on Monday. Part of the issue is that the patch actually contains a bunch of other improvements and fixes, so it had more of a lengthy QA period than it otherwise would do, and we had a really tough decision with regard to whether to hotfix just this one specific thing. The hotfix is relatively complicated, so we thought it was better to put it through QA fully, especially because there'll be new leagues soon. It's kind of messily handled, and I apologize for that, but we'll make sure that it is fixed soon, and it's unlikely that similar problems will occur again in the future.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to explain with the community. It was more like a clever use of game mechanics is how I would interpret it. That just got abused, but definitely it wasn't like an exploit or a bug. They just put 2 and 2 together and came up with a really powerful combination. But my next
sorry,
go ahead.
I was just going to say you could think of it as a build that's good enough to get nerfed, because it's playing by the rules, as it were. It's just that there's no way that can really be accepted as a viable way, balance-wise.
Right. The game wasn't intended to be played like that, yeah.
But this shows how smart the community is with this kind of stuff. I mean, that's something we didn't think of. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm. My next question more towards the elemental attack weapons becoming more viable through passives or gems, even like a strength dex gem. At the moment, it falls short to physical, mainly due to the fact that you can't leech both mana and HP like from gear. I feel like it should be more rewarding because you can't negate like a tri-Elliot reflect with like a lot of armor or endurance charges or immortal call. You're only limited to your resist, and usually if you go for a resist, you can only stack it so high. which also gives physical damage the upper hand. It's so disappointing to find an epic two-hander or a one-hander with tri-LE and massive amounts of damage with no real way to scale it without committing suicide at some point with reflect. And I feel like the gems just aren't there to support it. Like everything scales off of physical. It's like added fire. You're not gonna scale other than like wed, but the skill gems itself also scale off of physical damage, which seems to be like a big problem for the tri LE attack based characters. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts on
a
that?
lot of a lot of the support gems, like multi strike, as you level it, all it does is scale physical damage, and same with like spectral throw and stuff. They don't just scale attack damage. It's like a particular type, and it's only physical.
Yeah.
This is something that comes up occasionally in the balance department, mostly in the context of large changes we can make for the next major patch. It's exactly the type of thing that sounds good to fix in a minor patch because, you can tweak a few things in how they work, maybe apply leech to something else, maybe change a few skills. But we found that such changes can be very disruptive during the format races, so we try to keep, systems changes like this for the bigger patches when people are starting new characters anyway, and if we discuss them properly... the phone's ringing. Sorry, ignore that. If we discuss them properly beforehand, players will know that they can investigate that as a viable build. So this specific one, I don't know of any planned changes to it, and this is because it's one of those things where they haven't come up with a conclusion to actually bring to me. I think that Carl and Rory have it on the list of things to investigate. I'll have to check specifically this week, but I agree, it's certainly an issue. To some extent, there are easy fixes we can make. I'm a bit worried about some of them. Like, there's a potential keystone we can add that would affect it, but I worry that it would be too one-sided.
Right.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about Aegis Aurora. Arguably, well, maybe not even arguably, probably one of the most powerful items one can attain in terms of survivability. Do you guys have any plans to revisit this item in the future? Mainly in regards to PvP balance, but as a hardcore player, and as most other hardcore players know, if you want to survive a disconnect, let alone a disconnect in a boss room, all you really need is a Bringer of Rain, Stone of Lazwar, Rainbow Strides, and then, of course, the enabling piece, Aegis.
This is a diamond unique, which means that it's something where, the situation with diamond uniques is if the person really wants a certain thing to exist in the game, we'll accommodate them. And it may be that we underestimate the impact that it's going to have on the game balance despite spending a lot of time testing it. And some diamond uniques are things that we wouldn't choose to add to the game ourselves, but the person supported the game and believes it would be a good addition to it, so we try as hard as we can to accommodate. And this is certainly mentioned on the list of, very swingy uniques. There's certainly some changes to uniques coming in 1.1. I'm not sure if they're changing this one. They may be changing other stuff related to block. I can check. See, the problem with the balance questions is while I know that these are areas that are being discussed, I don't actually know the change that's being made in most cases. Until it's made.
Right. You
Okay.
probably wouldn't want to say it anyways until it was actually fully tested and.
Yeah, people who are watching shouldn't interpret this as, oh my god, they're nerfing everything. It's just they're
Yeah.
nerfing everything, and if it's determined to be a problem internally, it'll probably be changed. But that may be done at the gap between the 4-month leagues, so as not to immediately disrupt people's current characters.
Yeah. Aegis, it's been in the game for a while now, and it wasn't very popular until just recently with the addition of Bringer of Rain, which I wanted to talk about too. But, you might not have the answer or want to talk about it. I just wanted to say, how powerful it is as a 6-link, and it basically solves, almost any build's problems with the ability to 6-link, with, an automatic 6-link, considering the frequency at which it's dropped. When you zone into a full town, you can see upwards of a third to half the people wearing one. What are your opinions on something that's so ubiquitous like Bringer?
I don't specifically have a problem with the build being popular. It certainly isn't great from a diversity point of view, but 1/3 of the players using the current best build is not necessarily a problem in itself. We really like Bringer of Rain from a design point of view. The Diamond supporter Nathan, who designed that one, actually, there was discussion about him joining the company at one stage as a designer. We really like what he does. and the item is very clever, it may be overpowered. Maybe it does need adjustment, but
Yeah, I just feel like if it dropped at a much less frequent, rate, and it was like, I mean, it's definitely very, very valuable and powerful. Just feel like it's way too common and way too easily attainable, and you pretty much, find a bringer of rain in a 1 week, you pretty much like secured, with good play, and I mean, it's a very, very huge jump. It kind of takes some of the flavor out of the epic six linking of something. You're just like, oh, I'll just get a bringer for 5x or 6x, and I don't have to worry about it. But
yeah,
that's
I was
just
just checking the drop rate of bringer. Okay, this one is pitched as a not super common but still relatively build enabling uncommon unique. It's a problem where, let's say we decided we wanted to make it rarer, substantially rarer, like Calms, for example. The issue then is the players are trained to believe that they need a bringer. So now if they can't find one, either they'll RMT it, which isn't good for us, or they'll blame the drop rates in the game or how difficult it is to trade and a variety of other factors. And it's very hard to balance by rarity once the thing already has an established presence in the community. I don't want to use the word entitlement, but players will feel that it should be an attainable item because everyone else has one. So it's generally better to introduce items at the rarity they're going to stay at, so the expectations are correct. It may be that we just need to balance this through a stats point of view, or it may be that it's actually fine. I mean, perhaps the metagame changes already planned for 1.1 make that build slightly less viable.
Yeah, I think the power of melee in this league has something to do with the amount of people using it.
That's a really good thing. I mean, do you remember the path of ranged accusations in the past?
Yep, and CI and all that other stuff.
yeah.
Having it cycle every 4 months as to what the current strong thing is really useful. Like,
Right.
it would suck if it was path of ranged for 2 years in a row,
Right. You just get very stale. My next question is referring to skill points that are, picked up most often, like, iron reflexes, and not at all. Like, I'd probably suggest the flask nodes or the life and mana on kill. Is there any way to possibly make those nodes useful with maybe having your flask do damage as a degen instead of like a heal, or that'll incentivize people to pick up recovery nodes or something like that, or any along the lines of buffing them with some kind of hybridization like you guys did with the crit nodes near the witch. You guys added the life on the kill or whatever.
It's interesting, as a side issue, this may not particularly pertain, but we've received a lot of feedback about the table of the passives that were allocated in the 1 week race, where Iron Reflex is at the top and many of the less popular ones are barely allocated. This is an extremely polarizing table because the 1 week race mostly consists of very, very, experienced endgame players who know exactly what build they want, and they find the right build for the 1 week race and generally will allocate that, which is the right choice. I mean, to some extent, a race is a puzzle of what is the best build, and there's often a correct answer. So the keystone distribution in the core game, because both there are lots of people trying different things, and there are lots more viable builds for the time frame, and because there are a lot of players who are bad, the keystone distribution is much more even. Even the bad ones that relate to flasks and leech that aren't picked as often are still picked relatively often compared to the most popular ones. So it's very interesting when looking at those stats to consider how polarized it is. As for the specific question about the flask nodes that you were talking about, I don't know if we're planning on making them hybridized. It's definitely an area where they want to make sure that there's incentive to pick them. I believe at least one keystone related to this had a discussion ongoing with regard to whether it's going to just be strictly improved in 1.1. That may not actually happen though. And then the final note is it is okay for there to be passive skills that are worse than others. I mean, when we look at heat maps of what people have allocated on the passive tree, we like there being good areas to go to. We prefer that over everything is kind of equal and it doesn't really matter what you pick. There should be some good builds in the game for people to choose.
Right.
I remember in the past, back in the early beta days, when you guys would issue out currency as race rewards, and then you reverted that because it made people feel like they had to race. Personally, I feel that the way the new rewards are, where you can pull them out in upcoming leagues after the 2 week mark, is pretty close to the same. I kind of feel like I have to farm races in order to to farm at least high value items. Like in season right now, you can get Anvarius at 135 points, which is pretty easy to get. And you know, at the 2-week mark in a new league, you can pull it out and make a quick 5 to 7x or whatever. How do you feel about this feature and the impact it can have on a new economy with powerful endgame items?
So there are a number of things in play here. I mean, the first thing to note is, if everyone does this, then it's not going to be worth the 5 or 7x that it's worth when it's a map-only drop, if you see what I mean. If 2 weeks in,
right,
literally a third of the players, you know, at high, you know, in-game content are going, dude, I've got my 4 Anvariuses to trade, who wants them? And everyone's like, I've already got my 4, sorry, you know,
yeah.
it obviously affects the price. But anyway, that's just a side issue. I don't mean for that to be our answer. We picked the 2-week duration because we wanted there to be some competition in these leagues, and maybe 2 weeks is the wrong answer. I mean, for example, right now, if people were able to get race rewards in Domination and Nemesis, it wouldn't be a particularly big deal, right? You know, the leagues are relatively old, they're approaching, you know, the last month or so, and it's not a big problem for there to be some uniques that they got through spending time in other ways. It might be that 2 weeks is too early for us to allow the introduction of those items into the new leagues. It certainly allows for 2 weeks of intense competition, but there may just be too much spike there. So that might have been a bad call to set it at 2 weeks. Maybe the right answer is 6 weeks, maybe it's 4 weeks. Maybe we should change how the system works. But it's producing a very large amount of uptake in race participation, which is really good. Like, we look at our stats for the races and we say, well, this definitely works to incentivize it. Maybe it's not an ideal situation because it does allow people to invest time now for gain later. It's just a matter of making sure the gain later comes at a time when it's not too overpowering. Whether or not we'll change the 2-week thing here is a difficult decision because, I mean, if you're not racing, you look at the races and say, well, they're getting all this advantage, this is unfair, GGG needs to fix it. But if you are racing, you're listening to me say, maybe we'll change the duration, going, you better not change that 2-week thing. You know?
Yeah, I remember in Reddit you mentioned the Moonstone Ring possibly not being able to take those out. Is that still something?
There was a brief exploit available where you could use currency items to craft items that were sitting on one of these special stash tabs. So you could use your standard wealth to make really damn good rare Moonstone Rings. And we'll make sure that any rare Moonstone Rings are dealt with by the time they can be removed later. Like, this may involve... We don't think there's many. Like, obviously from the player's point of view, they don't know how many there are, so there could be millions of perfect ones as far as they're concerned. But in reality, I suspect it's just a few. You know, like 5 or something like that. So our intention is to track them down, you know, glance at their stats to make sure it's actually a problem, and then to say to the people, hey, so you should take this out or we're going to scour it, you know, or something like that. So we're still working on that, but there's a bit of we'll make sure that they don't get crazy endgame perfect rares that had, you know, 200 exalts and eternals dumped into them, into those new leagues.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and shift the podcast again. We're going to talk about some suggestions Ox and I came up with, and some of the community helped come up with the ideas that we would think that wouldn't take too much code and too much time, but it would overall enhance the gameplay and, you know, take out some of the frustrations that we have that just seems more tedious than, you know, that has a point or a purpose.
Okay.
First one, it's mainly regarding the Twitch feature in-game. It's just not up to the standard of, you know, OBS and XSplit. Is there any plan on implementing a better or less laggier Twitch stream in game? I feel like people that try to use it often misrepresent the game and the graphics and what it has to offer, and it's kind of like if someone were to watch it, they would just, you know, kind of be turned off. I currently only use the Twitch feature in game for the chat feature, and even that consumes quite a bit of resources over time.
This feature, to some extent, is as provided by Twitch. I mean, they've basically given us something that we drop into the game to make it work, and there may be configuration issues that we can fiddle with on our end to make it better. Like, if the quality just isn't up to it, then we need to talk to Twitch to find out what we're doing wrong, or what they're doing wrong, depending on where it falls. We're aware that there are improvements that can be made there. It's really kind of a matter of priorities. There's, like, for example, the specific guy who would be fixing this is the specific guy working on the event screen that will be used for the upcoming PvP tournament stuff, where you can actually view upcoming events from inside the game client itself rather than having to go to the website. And that is arguably more important to finish up than getting the Twitch stuff a little bit better, especially if it requires a lot of work. But I'll discuss it with him and Twitch to find out how hard it will be.
I'll agree with you on that one.
Okay, my next one is: are there any chances that we get some contrast in the map overlays? It just seems like the schematics that exist are just way too little or way too much contrast. And I'm referring to maps like Jungle Valley, Springs, and where there's too much contrast is probably Spider Forest, Arachnid Nest. I'm sure that people wouldn't mind if they were a different color, purple, gray, orange. I mean, who cares? As long as you can see where you need to go and where you haven't gone. It just seems like it's very, very frustrating, and it takes a little too much effort to, like, it kind of like makes the gameplay more tedious. Is there any way that you guys can change the color schemes?
We absolutely want to make the minimap better. It's definitely on the list. I don't know if it's on the list for before 1.1. I'll have to check. There is actually a color bias in there at the moment where it takes the color and shifts its hue, saturation, and value around a bit so that it, it is a false color, as it were, and we could just exaggerate that quite a lot more. I'll talk to Jonathan about it. I mean, if that's just a matter of exaggerating the color, then that's a single numeric change that's easy to do. It'll require a bit of testing, but there is a long-term plan to actually improve the minimap substantially.
Is there any chance on getting monster reveal on the minimap when there's less than 20 remaining? There's nothing worse than looking for those last 2 to 4 mobs at the end of a map.
The issue with having code in there that does that is it's very easy for someone to come along like a map hack and just turn it on for potentially all the monsters. I mean, they can edit their copy of the client, so instead of saying less than 20, it's less than 2,000, and suddenly they've got monsters revealed. So we're wary about adding functionality that's super easy to be weaponized, as it were. Having said that, the tools to fight map hacks and stuff are only getting better, so it may not be a problem. Once we have it down to the state where we can detect it rapidly 100% of the time to punish people.
Okay, is there any chance of getting an alternate colored X for the group leaders so that we know who to follow? It can get very, very frustrating when you have people just running every which way and no real way to find out, where your leader is or who's leading. Just like a simple, different colored X and maybe like a party leader promotion. I mean, I would just be okay with the colored X. I don't really need the party leader stuff, the function, because you could just easily just drop group and recreate. But I definitely think that would increase the enjoyability or the flavor of grouping together.
Okay, I'll raise that with the team. I hadn't heard that suggestion before, but it sounds good.
After viewing the Athene video that you had, and you said you would like to participate in like the Save the Children charity, but in a way it wouldn't upset the fans by compromising the integrity of the way the game looks. I completely agree, but I'm sure the community would back it if you guys just had like a regular microtransaction that had the name Save the Children, and then maybe say like all the proceeds would go to this charity. Instead, I definitely feel like anything logo-ish wouldn't feel right, and I feel like the microtransaction shop would be a good avenue for that. Much like what Warcraft did with the fundraiser with the tsunami and natural disasters with the pets. I even feel like even GGG footprints would be very weird. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm okay with adding microtransactions which have a name that says what cause they're for without actually looking any different in game.
Right.
There was a discussion about this week where we were asked to add something that at worst could be like razor footprints again, and we certainly didn't want to do that. But there is potentially the scope that if the item is named about some good cause, then people will understand what it's for without it actually ruining the immersion when someone runs past you in town.
I love min-maxing, every possible way, and utilizing both weapon slots for actual combat instead of just, using your offhands just to level gems. Is there any chance that Tempest Shield can stay active while weapon swapping between 2 different sets of shields if the gem is located, like, say, in a non-weapon or shield slot, like if it was in your gloves or something? Or is it designed specifically that it always has to be, excuse me, that it always has to be recasted on weapon swap?
I'm pretty sure this is just a consequence of how the code works. It may be possible to make it work a different way, but it's often very fiddly to fix this stuff. I'll note it down to discuss with the guys, though.
Okay. Also, with the somewhat recent changes to auras, and the amount of free gem slots it created for a lot of people, I find myself having more abilities than I can keep on my action bar, even while utilizing trigger gems. Is there any possibility that the move only command can be a bindable key in the options instead of having to use hotkey real estate? Most action RPGs do this, like Diablo, Torchlight.
At the moment, I believe it's set up so that you can only cast a skill even movement that's on your bar. I'll have to check. I mean, it would require some re-engineering, but it could certainly work. There's also discussion of adding another bind key, which is possible, but basically it just kind of unconstrains a resource where there's some value in it being constrained. So
Okay.
it's something that's being discussed a fair amount.
So the game is not balanced on you having 7 actions on a bar.
I mean, put it this way, we don't want unlimited numbers of actions because it is nice for players to have choices about what they have equipped, but at the same time we don't know that the number of actions they have at the moment is necessarily the right number.
This is kind of like a follow-up. If there are any plans on having weapon swaps save separate sets of hotkeys, like, say, you know, right now when you do it, it only saves the gem changes that are in the weapon slots.
This is to do with the way it was implemented. I actually wanted it to be the other way initially, but there was a very persuasive case made to me about why that's difficult from a technical point of view, so this got the feature in much earlier than otherwise. It is possible for us to change this. I don't think it's the highest priority thing, though, when faced with other things we have to do before March.
Right. I was just curious to ask if it would be possible to have like a first to 100 in the next 4-month leagues, both Domination and Nemesis, if you would entertain the idea of them becoming an exile, whether via the name or the costume, so that we could like see like a spicier race for 4-month league. Kind of like I mean, everybody loves watching the race on Twitch. I mean, this race, this 4-month, obviously was not very entertaining at all. But I mean, for the future, so that Poe has some history of, oh, these 2 guys were the top 2 guys, back in season 2 or the second 4-month, or yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
We can definitely discuss getting it so that the people who are first to 100 in the new leagues have rogue exiles made after them. To some extent, their exact characters they were using may not make particularly good rogue exile fodder depending on what builds they have. So It may be that we just take something inspired by their name and some similar-ish build to what they're using and come up with something that isn't 100% accurate but is a good legacy.
Yeah, the thought was like the name or just their outfit, and then you can just build whatever kind of exile the game you guys could use.
Right.
Yeah, okay, well, I'll discuss it with the team. It seems like it's a very easy kind of prize to offer for that, and I do agree that having a competition to get to 100 is very cool.
Yeah, we definitely see some more high-end rips and more motivation to push harder. You never know at any point when that person might die or fall over. I think it'd just be very entertaining to watch as there's no races going on or whatever.
Yep, fair enough.
To me, the skin transfers that you guys recently added, I think they could be one of your largest moneymakers behind stash tabs. If there was a system in place to turn items from permanent leagues into microtransactions that could be used in any league, I know there's probably some technical stuff, to getting that sorted out right, but I feel that I personally don't race because I feel that while the rewards are very appealing, I love all the alternate art stuff. The rewards are just too temporary for me to participate in, because I know when I take out this item from the tab, after this league ends, it's going to be dumped into a permanent league, and I'm never going to get to see it again, so I feel like all that work went to waste. I know most other people that play the 4-month leagues probably feel the same way, where they're not going to play in a permanent league when it ends. It would make the race rewards something people would strive to attain that maybe wouldn't race otherwise, because they know that they could always show off their achievements from previous seasons to distinguish themselves from other players.
Yeah, okay, well, this is something that's been discussed. It's just very hard from a technical point of view. You have to be really careful when dealing with items between leagues. I mean, you can have some horrible exploits. I find it interesting that this conversation has both the feedback that people don't want to race because pulling the items out in the next league isn't good, versus people racing so that they can pull the items out in the next league to get a massive advantage. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I understand they're two different things, right? In one case, people want an advantage 2 weeks in. In the other case, they're thinking, well, that advantage may not be, and I don't want to consume the item in that league when it could potentially be better for one I'm playing more in later.
Well, I want to thank you a lot, Chris. Thanks for everything that you guys do at GGG, that you've done making the best game out there. It's really the game that I've always dreamed of playing, and I have a blast every day playing it. I know you guys are working very hard on PvP, and as you know, I'm dying to slit throats. Are you guys still on track with the possible testing in 1.06, or have any secrets you'd like to share?
So yeah, I should address the PvP thing because you've been so patient, Ox.
Yeah, he's really biting his tongue.
Thank you very much.
I told him try not to hound on him about PvP too much.
So we felt for release that we could get PvP tournaments in, and we almost made it. The problem is that there's just lots and lots of complex stuff behind the scenes that we hadn't quite predicted, that we're gradually getting sorted out, and it's getting pretty close. I would like to say it's in 1.06. I don't know for sure, but it's the kind of feature that can transcend those exact patches, right? Like, let's say we release 1.06, and then the next day PvP's working. We'll slap that on 1.07 and release it that day, if we need to. So it's not a thing where if we miss the boat for 1.06, you're, waiting a month longer than necessary. It'll be in as soon as it's in. We really want to get specific testing in so we can work out durations, like whether or not it's, best of 3 or best of 5 in those tournaments, whether you want to have 30-minute tournaments or 1-hour tournaments with lots of little rounds inside them. There's a bunch of questions like that would be good to get community feedback on before we start our first actual tournament season. But we have PvP item rewards, which are like the race rewards, just sitting there ready to go. It's pretty close. The main thing is actually getting it to work reliably, and ideally we'd like to get the new event screen in as well, which will let players, while they're playing the game, they can just open the events panel and they'll be able to see, hey look, there's a race starting in an hour, and 2 hours after that there's a PvP event that's, for like level 28 domination or whatever it is.
Will it be kind of like the one on the forums where you can see your progress towards the next rewards and all that?
We may put the bar in there, but that's pretty much just polish once we get time. Like,
okay.
It would ideally initially be a way of seeing what's coming up so a user doesn't have to use the website, and allow them to join these events. It'll be especially important because there's quite a lot of different PvP events. Like, there's different brackets, there's different leagues, there's different event types. Like, for example, a CTF event for level 28 players in Standard is very different than, one-on-one Nemesis open level, and so...
Right.
To some extent, like, there's a difficult decision here because one way to do it is you kind of put a heavy emphasis on certain leagues. Like, you go, okay, this season PvP is all about Standard, where all the good items are, make your standard PvP characters, and you barely do anything in the new 4-month leagues. That's one way to do it. Or maybe you say, screw the Standard players, we're going to play in the 4-month leagues. That's where you have to play if you want to do PvP. And that's also bad because there's so much like established Standard PvP knowledge and wealth going on. Right. So the approach we're taking initially is to have PvP events in all the leagues, and this will mean that, like, Hardcore, which is the least popular league, will probably have less events, but there will be something that those players can play. And the theory is this may encourage people to play in multiple leagues, or at least to have like a PvP character in 2 leagues, for example. So
you're not talking about the leagues or the tournaments all being simultaneous, like say there'll be a 1v1 for an hour, at all the leagues at the same time, but they'll just be spread out through the day in the different leagues?
Right, the problem with it being simultaneous is you can't really have, like, let's say 100 tournaments is about right, and I'm just picking numbers out of the air here, but let's say 100 tournaments is about right for Nemesis. You can't really have 100 tournaments in Hardcore because they're not going to have very many players. I mean, if you had like 6 tournaments in Hardcore, you'll probably get a decent number of players turning up, especially if they're at a dedicated time. Someone will go, hey, I've got a Hardcore character I can convert to PvP. And that is better for the people who only play in Hardcore, so they've got someone to play against. Like, we're trying to be careful to not... to have it so that by accident a certain league has too few players. And bear in mind, you have to consider the regional thing here. If a guy's playing on the Australia server, he can't play PvP fairly against a guy on the European server. So it'd be unfair for us to say it's a European event. Australians, you've just got to play over there. Like, we have to run some Australian events as well. And because of this, there's a ton of different types of events. And it's going to be very interesting to get feedback on whether or not there are too many types, whether there are some that we need to drop, how we're going to deal with the players who are on those specific event types. Like, if you're playing old school Hardcore on Australia, and you only want to play level 28 and below CTF, you might only have one event in the season that you can actually, compete in. So that's something that we're certainly putting a lot of thought into scheduling.
Okay, well, I just wanted to thank you, Chris, for taking the time out of your day to, come share, everything that you know about, what's going on GGG today, and, just sharing information about yourself. This is going to conclude our podcast. I wanted to thank all of you guys for watching and your continued support for Path of Exile. I'd also like to thank Logan and the Twitch staff for working with me at the last minute to get everything running. Uspan and his business design, dapadesign.com, for all the art that he's helped me with. If this is a game that you haven't tried yet, I'm sure the community, Chris, and GGG would love for you to try it. It's free to play, and it can be found via pathofexile.com or even on Steam. And if you're looking for a place to get help, the Path of Exile Twitch community has always been a very strong resource to get anything that you need. Is there anything you'd like to say, Chris, as we conclude?
I had a great time on the podcast. I'd love to do it again. So I guess, start preparing some more questions at some point. But thanks very much for the good questions. Yeah, I'll see you guys later on.
Do you think it'd be possible to get Rory and Carl in on this?
If they want to donate their free time, then sure. I mean, I'm happy to, and I'll have a chat with them to see if they're interested.
All right, pitch it to them and get back to me.
The stream seems to be interested in fishing, it seems.
Interesting. They should really try to work out how to use the advanced fishing holes. It's been pretty, slow uptake so far.
That's awesome.
All right, sounds good. Thanks a lot, Chris.
Thanks a lot, Chris.
No problem. See you later.
Later.